You are listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest today is poet Carrie Green. Hi, Carrie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Katerina. Thank you so much for having me.
Carrie Green is the author of Studies of Familiar Birds, available from Able Muse Press. Her poems have appeared in Beloit Poetry Journal, Poetry Northwest, River Styx, and others. And now I would invite Carrie to tell us more about her book.
Great, thank you. So many poems in the book reflect upon the illustrations in the book Illustrations of the Nests and Eggs of the Birds of Ohio. And that was a book that was published serially from 1879 to 1886. And it was actually the first book of its kind about American eggs and nests. And it was begun by Genevieve Jones, who started the project with a friend. And just a month actually after the book's first plates were mailed to subscribers, Genevieve died suddenly of typhoid fever at the age of 32. So her family decided to complete the project in her honor. And her mother was actually the one who completed all the rest of the illustrations in the book. She had had no experience in scientific illustration, really no interest in ornithology, and yet you really can't tell the difference between her illustrations and Genevieve's illustrations. So the book, many of the poems in the book, as I said, are about those illustrations and about Virginia's grief for her daughter. But the book also combines their story with the story of my father, who died when he was 57 of pancreatic cancer. So I kind of turned to the Jones story as a way of understanding my own grief.
So you, in part, you answered the question, but maybe your poems answer the other part of the question. And my question was going to be, and please tell if there is more, what attracted you to this book in particular? How did you look at it and say, oh, I want to structure my own poetry book around it?
Well, I think it didn't. I was attracted to the book. There was a reprint of the illustrations. The original book, there are only maybe 20 copies that we know about, in private collections and libraries. Actually, the University of Kentucky has a black and white copy of the book. But I guess it was in 2012, maybe, someone published a reproduction copy of the book. It's called America's Other Audubon, and it was collected by a librarian, Joy Kaiser. So that's how I actually found out about this family. Was actually one of my colleagues. I am also a librarian, and one of my colleagues said, I think you would really like this book. And, she had no idea what she was starting. And the story itself was fascinating. The story of, this young woman who had these really amazing ambitions, and yet because of the time period, she was not able to pursue them in a formal way like her brother was. And yet she undertook this extremely ambitious project So I didn't really realize when I first started writing about them that actually I ended up being more inspired by Virginia's story, the mother, and I think it was that connection of her grief and what she was able to do in her grief. You know, these illustrations gave her a way to focus, and a project, and also a way to connect to her daughter.
Do you remember the first poem that you wrote?
Yes, I believe the first poem that I wrote was actually, it's actually the first poem in the book. And it's called The Studio, and it's about, they had a studio where they completed the work on the project that Genevieve's father kind of, you know, built for her. And I read a description of, and I think this was in Joy Kaiser's book, I read a description of a young boy who went into the studio after many years of no one going in there.
And how long did it take you to write all the poems?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Probably, well, you know, the poems about all of the illustrations, I would say probably 5 years. The poems about my father go back even further, maybe 10.
I am very excited to hear a few of the poems. Please read a few for us.
Great. Well, I hadn't planned to read it, but since you asked about the first poem, I will read this first poem that I wrote. The Studio. You will find it is not enough to view the room as panorama. The clutter of nests and eggs blurs beneath a shroud of dust, and all you do not know: names, calls, topography. Not to mention an oriole's wings clipping the air beside your ear, or a robin's nest filched moments ago and flush with warm blue eggs. Step inside the room. Unlock cabinets and open drawers to reveal the ordered clutches of eggs, thumb or palm-sized, brown as a common hen's, or creamy and swirled like marbles. Blown out, insides washed clean. Unstack the nests from shelves. The newspaper packed within crumbles at your touch. Note the yellowed down of willows, the brittle grasses and weeds, and in between, the long gray hair and black thread, remnants of someone's mourning. And the next poem is, that I'm going to read, is a poem based on one of the plates that Virginia illustrated, and it's called House Wren. The average specimen almost fills whatever vessel contains it, from beehive to mortise, amorphous as water. Here, the nest's base of twigs sprawls into a loose pile, the cup's frothy rim of chicken feathers no longer hiding inside the apple tree. But surely we all know this nest. We found it in our coffee cans, in our barns and privies, inside all our little caves of emptiness, mundane as pockets or a child's boot forgotten by the back door. And the next poem I wanted to read is one of the poems about my father. And this poem takes place in Florida, where I grew up. And it's called Robbing the Bees. And it is also after one of my MFA professors, John Wood. Brother, one day the grove and hives will empty, the neighbors' trees frozen back to stumps, our father's bees scattered across the scrub. But today the scent of orange blossom reaches our patch of sand, and the bee yard teems with thieving wings. Our father works the hives, white shirt buttoned to the neck, hands glove clumsy. Veiled, he's mysterious as a bride. Brother, we'll want to recall the pollen-dusted light kissing scrub oak and sand pine, the needles smoking in tin, the bees' stunned flight as our father offers a taste of honey on his pocket knife. Our tongues steal sweetness from the rusted blade. So I'm gonna switch back to another plate poem. And this poem is called Ode to the Blue Jay. And it begins with an epigraph by Howard Jones. That was Virginia Jones's son and Genevieve Jones's brother. And he actually wrote the majority of the notes that accompanied each plate. And so the epigraph reads, "Notwithstanding the general meanness of the jaybird, some good things may be said of him. Can there be boldness without a tilt toward meanness? Even your appearance manifests daring. The blue crest that rises at the first light, the line of black collar starched upon the gray breast, the black bars and white scallops banding blue wings, braced against the scaled trunks of pines festooned with thorns, only the nest's interior betrays any softness. Who can deny the audacity as you pilfer rootlets from our fresh graves? Take them, little bird. We need only dirt to line our final beds." And have a couple more. So this next one is a poem that describes a crow behavior that is actually remarkably similar to a funeral. I don't know if you or your listeners know much about crows, but they are fascinating birds and they're so intelligent. And this is just one of the little things that I picked up along the way in my research. And I've been thinking about the poem a lot lately because of the pandemic and how it has robbed us of so many things, including that ability to collectively gather and mourn all of these, over 200,000 people that we've lost. So this is called Funeral. If we were crows, we'd gather in the trees and look down at you, the shock of your body, a heap of black feathers, broken neck and wing, eased by the veil of leaves. We'd call to each other, our voices rattling branches and window panes. Some of us would fly from tree to tree to make sure we all understood. Perhaps we'd even scold you a little, our sentiment as blunt as our beaks. We'd know we couldn't rouse you, though it would please us to sense the mice stirring, the moles tunneling deeper below ground in your honor. If not for the trees beginning to pitch and moan beneath our weight, we could go on and on. We wouldn't want to leave you. We'd stretch and then our cause into silence. Above you, our wings would beat the sky, grief unfurling like a shroud. And this is the last poem. And it's another poem about my father that takes place in an orange grove in Florida. The last time my father left the house. In the grove, next year's citrus hung leaf green on trees, and this year's oranges brightened branches or the ground where they had fallen. We should have known it was too late, the fruit easing past ripeness. We should have left them for the ants and birds. White blossoms veiled the scent of sugar, turning. Bees droned inside the blooms, dizzy with the promise of more sweetness. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. These are lovely. These are lovely. Do you have copy of the book already? It's coming out in December.
I do, yeah. This is for those of you who can see it.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Like.
Please describe the cover for our listeners.
Sure. The image on the cover is one of Virginia's plates. It is what was called the Carolina dove at the time, but is we now refer to it as the mourning dove in the common language, common name for the bird.
Yeah, it looks to me like a thick book. How many pages?
I don't know. 74 pages.
Okay, pretty good size. Can you say a few things about the role of ekphrastic work in your basically? You seem to write a lot of ekphrastic poetry. You know, you have a ekphrastic chapbook that I've interviewed you about. So I was wondering if you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I think I really first started writing ekphrastic poetry when I started writing about my friend Lori LaRusso's paintings, right. And she and I wrote a few of them and showed them to her, and she wanted to do a book together. So we applied for a grant from the Kentucky Foundation for Women and published the chapbook. But yeah, to me, there's something about the act of really close looking at art, whether it's an illustration or a painting or a photograph, and really noticing things that kind of opens up connections, opens up pathways in my brain to allow me to make leaps and connections. And you know, it's a little bit different in Lori's paintings. You know, she often paints, well, the chapbook that I did was all paintings of cake. So she has a lot of paintings of birthday cake. So in those paintings, a lot of times I was kind of filling in the story, like that is not said. But in these illustrations of the eggs and nests, it was more like looking really closely and seeing what was there.
Has Lori read your new book, Carrie?
She has, yes.
Yeah, what does she think?
Oh, she loves it.
That's wonderful. So, of course she loves it. The poems are fantastic and very well thought out. And, you know, from whatever I've heard, the book is brilliant and I look forward to getting my own copy.
Oh, thank you.
What kind of events have you planned around that book?
Yeah, I'm still working on that and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. You know, trying to get some online readings, of course, since that's what's available right now, which in many ways is a great thing because, you know, I've certainly been taking advantage of them. And I read at the Kentucky Women Writers Conference, and you know, it was great because my family in Florida and my friends all over the country were able to attend. So there are some benefits to that. I may be doing an event with Joy Kaiser, who wrote, as I mentioned, the America's Other Audubon, for an Audubon Society. So I would like to do some things like that as well for, you know, groups that maybe aren't, maybe poetry is not their first love, but they love that subject.
And I have two more questions for you. And one is, do you have new projects underway?
I do. One of the things I'm working on right now, I actually just started writing some erasure poems, which I've never really done before. I've tried it before. And this was the first time that that it's sort of working for me. So I'm erasing the Baffle Book of Crimes to Solve, which was published in 1928, and it's kind of these different puzzles, you know, where you try to figure out.
I bet that's fun.
It's really fun.
Do you meet any words that you don't know or you never use?
Any words that?
Yeah, any words in the diction, you know, in the diction of the material.
Yeah. Well, because it was published in 1928, that's kind of one of the fun things about it is seeing words like tosh, you know, this kind of slang word from 1928, or and also there's, you know, all this language about crime and suspects and that are sort of working their way into the poems as well. So it has been really fun. And, you know, I haven't, like many people, it's been kind of tough to keep writing going during this really difficult time, not just because of the pandemic, but because of all the things that are happening in the world politically. So this has been a nice way to sort of ease back into it. So I highly recommend it if you're a writer who is stuck. Try doing some erasures.
Yeah. And my last question is, what is it like to work in a library these days?
Yes, well, it is very different for me. Our library is open. I work at the Jessamine County Public Library. So the building is physically open, but we are not doing any programs in person. You know, you can't come in and hang out in the library, which a lot of people used to use it for. So even though the building is open, it often feels very empty, which is just not something, you know, our library is a very busy place and a very active part of the community. But you know, we're also trying to serve people in other ways. So a lot of the programs that I used to do in person are now online, either on Zoom like this, or you know, as a video. So, you know, we're like everyone, we're trying to make the best of it.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for coming on the show and reading from your new book and sharing so much of yourself with us. I appreciate you and have good luck with the new book and the new projects with the erasures.
Thank you. Thank you, Katerina. Thanks for having me on. And thanks to everyone for watching and listening.